a dinner reservation, and a guest who wouldn't leave alive. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me where you're watching from. Your comments help this mystery circle grow stronger. I truly enjoy hearing from every single one of you. Let's begin. You'd think after a decade of trotting behind Nero Wolfe's desk chair like a faithful Labrador, I'd get a day off to enjoy my steak in peace. But when you work for a man whose ideal day includes 100 orchids, 14 eggs, and 0 interruptions, the universe feels obligated to stir the pot just to keep balance, which explains why I was 3 bites into my ribeye at Rusterman's, our old friend Marko Vukcic's pride and joy, when the waiter stopped by with more than just the dessert tray. "A message for you, Mr. Goodwin," he said, handing me a folded card. "From the maitre d', it's urgent. Now, most urgent things in my life tend to involve gunshots, broken noses, or Wolfe losing a jar of saffron. This one was different. Written in blocky, rushed handwriting. Meet me in Thai. Private dining room C. Someone's life may depend on it. Seal." The initials meant nothing to me, but I knew 2 things. 1, there was a private dining room C, and 2, if someone thought I was their ticket out of a life-threatening jam, they hadn't read my resume closely enough. Still, I went. The room was dim, hushed, panelled in walnut and trimmed with the kind of crimson drapes that made everything feel more clandestine. A table for 6 had been set, gleaming silverware untouched. And seated at the far end was a woman with the posture of someone who'd learned to fake calm before she learned long division. She looked up. Blonde, mid-30s, dressed like money but not new money, sleeves precise, pearl pin at the collar. Her lipstick hadn't smudged, but her hands gave her away. She'd been wringing them under the table. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "I wasn't sure you'd come. You've got me at a disadvantage, miss," which is usually the part where Wolfe stops listening. "I'm Claudia Lisa," she said, "and I didn't come to you, I came to him." Him needed no clarification. I gave a slow nod. "He doesn't leave his house for dying men," I said. "You think he'll do it for dinner guests?" She didn't flinch. "Then let him stay in his chair, but someone is going to be killed, Mr. Goodwin. And I believe it will happen at this table, tonight." Now, I'll admit, it had some flair. The private room, the table for 6, the whiff of foreboding like a spritz of doom behind the ears. But I've been in this game too long to scare easy, and not long enough to find melodrama charming. "Let's back up," I told her. "Who exactly is on the guest list for this predicted homicide?" Her fingers found the edge of the napkin and folded it perfectly into a triangle. "There's a private celebration tonight. 6 people. Myself, my fiancée, and 4 others, all tied together by one thing. An old restaurant." "Rusterman's?" "No, a smaller one in Soho. Years ago it was called Traviata." She paused. "It closed after a scandal," she added. "A food critic died during dinner service. There was an inquest. Nothing was proven. That jogged." A rusty file in my brain. "He choked, didn't he?" "They said it was an accident, but I don't believe that. And neither does at least one of the people coming tonight. Someone's decided that what happened back then deserves a sequel." At this point, I was wondering if Wolfe would throttle me for dragging a case into the brownstone that involved truffle oil and vendettas from dead bistros. But Claudia Lisa had the kind of nerves that only come from desperation, and I've learned to trust desperation. It's like perfume for trouble. I asked her for the full guest list, which she scribbled on a place card with a borrowed pen. Claudia, Lisa Adrian Barron, her fiancé, head of a culinary consortium. Chef Maury Bragg, former Traviata head chef. Yvette Rollins, wine consultant. Felix Troy, restaurant investor. Carmela Guidice, ex-sommelier turned food critic. They all knew the man who died, she said. They all were there when it happened, and tonight they're all invited to sit at the same table again. How poetic. I didn't plan the seating, she snapped. Adrian did. He thinks it'll show how everyone's moved on. I think he's wrong. I pocketed the card and rose. All right, you've bought 10 minutes of Wolfe's irritation. I'll bring this to him. If he doesn't throw the whole thing out the window, you might get lucky. Thank you. She said it like someone who hadn't had much occasion to mean it recently. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, one leg slung over the other like a man trying to outrun responsibility through posture alone. I gave him the rundown, left out the adjectives, and handed him Claudia's note and the list. He peered over the rims of his glasses and gave a grunt that could have meant anything from "this is piffle" to "I might consider this if Fritz's." Veal comes out dry tonight. Do you believe her? He asked. I believe she's scared. Foy, fear is the most unreliable form of honesty, but you're still talking. Go on. So I did. The dead critic, the scandal, the reunion, the table for 6 and the lady with nerves of steel wool. Wolfe didn't twitch until I got to the bit about the original restaurant, Traviata. He set the card down carefully. That name, he said, was once associated with civet-laced venison. That offended me profoundly. Sounds like motive, I said. His eyes narrowed. Arrange interviews one at a time here tomorrow morning. And with that the hook was baited. The line dropped. And the great Nero Wolfe reluctantly, grudgingly, was on the case. I arrived back at the brownstone just as Fritz was lowering a veal roast into the Dutch oven, and let me tell you, the smell was enough to make me consider ignoring the whole Claudia Lisi affair for the sake of dinner. But duty called, and Wolfe had already given a rare nod of engagement, which meant the wheels were in motion and I was the designated oil. The next morning began like most others in the brownstone. Wolfe in his orchids from 9 to 11, me, fielding calls and pretending to read the newspaper while eavesdropping on Fritz's arguments with the butcher. At precisely 11, Wolfe rang for me. I came in, notepad in hand, already knowing we had our first suspect, correction guest, scheduled. Forenoon. Wolfe's chair faced the door as always, slightly reclined, his belly a monument to Fritz's devotion. He had already reviewed Claudia Lisi's guest list and naturally had formed opinions without the inconvenience of evidence. He flicked a finger in the direction of the office door. That one, he said, the investor, Troy. Begin with. Him. He's at noon. You want the questions written down? No, I'll speak. You'll listen, which is how it always went. Wolfe would sit silent for the first few minutes of an interview, like a Buddha with a grievance, then unfurl one sentence like a whip that sent the guest babbling into confession or contradiction. That was strategy. Mine was making sure the confession got recorded. At 11:58, Felix Troy rang the bell, punctual as a debt collector. I let him in. Mid-40s, tailored pinstripe, thin black mustache trimmed with surgical precision. The kind of man who looked at furniture as if wondering how much of it he could expense. You run a tight ship, he said as I ushered him into the office. We run a ship, I said. Whether it's tight depends on what you're hauling. He took the red chair across from Wolfe's desk and crossed one leg, smiling. Wolfe didn't return it. Mr. Troy, Wolfe said, Miss Claudia Lisi has expressed a concern. Troy's expression flickered, the faintest lapse of smugness. She's always had a dramatic streak. Wolfe didn't blink. She believes. Our gathering you helped arrange may be the prelude to violence. To murder, you mean? She didn't use the term. You have. Troy shifted. Look, Mr. Wolfe, the dinner is nothing more than a reunion. Traviata was a disaster, but it happened years ago. We've all moved on. So moved on, Wolfe said dryly, that you've all chosen to dine together in memory of the disaster? Adrian's idea, Claudia's fiancé. He thinks reconciliation makes good PR, and he's not wrong. The restaurant industry is full of egos. If we show unity, maybe it softens the stain, or revives the scent, Wolfe murmured. That earned a pause. I don't know what Claudia told you, Troy said, But none of us killed Landon Greaves, that was the name, the food critic, the one who died choking at Traviata 10 years back. I made a note, finally having something better to call him than the guy who croaked mid-course. Wolfe steepled his fingers. And yet, he said, you all stood to gain by his silence. Troy laughed. Everyone did. He was vicious. He didn't just kill restaurants. He murdered them. In print. You were an investor in Traviata. Yes, silent partner. I left after the scandal, cashed out, started a wine import business, which now collaborates with Mr. Barron's consortium. Correct? Hence the dinner. Do you believe someone might want revenge for Greaves? No. Honestly, I think Claudia wants attention. She was barely involved back then, just some hostess Maury liked to hire for gala nights. She believes someone will be murdered, Troy snorted. Then she's paranoid or drunk. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Was she either then? Back then. He considered. She drank, sure, but don't we all? Wolfe waved a hand. That will be all for now. Troy rose. Let me know if you solve the mystery before dessert is served. After he left, Wolfe closed his eyes. He is glib, he said, and confident. Too confident. He didn't blink, I agreed. You think he's our man? I think he believes he's above suspicion. That is never a good sign. We had 20 minutes before the next arrival. Carmela Guidis, former sommelier, now writing scathing little columns for a trendy food blog called The Eaten Word. When she showed up, she looked like she'd crawled out of an espresso machine. Black hair, black coat, and enough tension to string a cello. She declined tea and sat stiffly. I don't like Claudia, she said. Let's get that out of the way. Wolfe didn't react. She believes one of us killed Greaves, Wolfe said. She always believed that, Carmela snapped. She used to whisper it after shifts, like it made her smarter than the rest of us. The rest of us understood the truth. Greaves was an accident, a tragic one, but an accident. You were working that night. I was pouring Riesling. I remember because he hated it, said it tasted like peach soap. Then he bit into the duck, started coughing and dropped dead on the floor. You didn't suspect foul play? No. Not at the time. But now? She hesitated. It's been years, but the truth is, he made enemies. Maury hated him. Yvette hated him. Even Adrian had reason to. Greaves made fun of one of his first restaurant ventures, called it a petting zoo with linen. Amusing, Wolfe murmured. I didn't kill him, Carmela said. But if someone did, it wouldn't shock me. Do you feel threatened? Attending this dinner? She stared at him. Would you? I would not attend, Wolfe replied flatly. She left with a shrug, and Wolfe let out a breath like he'd just inhaled too much ignorance and was trying to clear the air. They are. Prickly, he muttered. You think Claudia's right? She is not entirely wrong. These people were not brought together by coincidence. Mr. Barron is staging a production, one intended for effect. Claudia is the only one not playing her part. So what's our next move? Miss Lisa, bring her in. I wish to see how far she is prepared to go, I called her. She arrived just after lunch, wrapped in a scarf and anxiety. She sat without speaking until Wolfe gestured. I've spoken to Mr. Troy and Miss Guidis, he said. Their version of events matches the public record. But not the truth, Claudia said. That, Wolfe said, remains to be seen. But there is something you've omitted. She tensed. You were not merely a hostess. You were involved. With Landon Greaves, her jaw set. We dated, briefly, and he ended it badly. Because of something he learned. Because he enjoyed making people squirm. He threatened to publish a piece about me. About Traviata. I begged him not to. 2 weeks later, he was dead. You believe one of your friends killed him to protect you? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was about power. That is always the likeliest motive. She nodded slowly. But someone is still angry, Mr. Wolfe. Someone wants to finish what they started. Wolfe leaned back. Then we must ensure they are served first. She blinked. Served? Justice, Miss Liss, Wolfe said. Served cold. She left looking only slightly reassured. I closed the door and turned to Wolfe. You believe her now? I believe, Wolfe said, that this dinner has been set with precision, and not for the sake of cuisine. I opened my notebook. So, what next? Send for Saul quietly. I want eyes on every chair at that table before the soup is poured. And with that, Wolfe returned to silence, the wheels turning. Quiet, steady, deadly. Like the table, reserved for murder. By the time Fritz served the quiche Lorraine for dinner, Wolfe had drafted a mental seating chart more strategic than Caesar. At Elysia. The players were forming clear outlines in his mind. Felix Troy, too slick. Carmela Guidis, too bitter. Claudia Lisa, too nervous to be lying outright. And now we were down to the rest of the dinner party. Yvette Rollins, the wine, consultant and Maury Bragg, the former head chef of Traviata. Adrian Barron, Claudia's fiancé and orchestrator of the whole candlelit reunion, would come last, Wolfe said, because a host always tries to control the room. That was Wolfe's idea of foreplay. The next morning, Yvette Rollins walked into the office like she was auditioning for the role of Cooler Than You. She had on a charcoal grey pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, a pale silk scarf that suggested sophistication or strangulation depending on the knot, and eyes that had seen too many expensive wine cellars and not enough. Truth. I assume you know why I'm here, she said, settling in. That you presume, Wolfe replied, is sufficient evidence of your familiarity with the situation. She smiled. It was not warm. Yes, I know Claudia's stirring the pot. And yes, I'm attending the dinner, assuming the building doesn't collapse or someone replaces the lobster bisque with arsenic. Wolfe wasn't amused. Humor can be a veil or a weapon, Miss Rollins. Which is it for you? Self-defense. Against what? Reputation, memory, Claudia Lisa, I asked. So you don't buy her theory? I don't buy anything without proof, Mr. Goodwin, and Claudia's got a track record of making emotional leaps. I don't deny that the past was messy. Greaves. Dying during service, it was awful, but tragic, not criminal. She said you and Greaves had conflict. Yvette's jaw twitched, but her tone stayed level. Greaves liked to bait me. He once told me that my burgundy picks were gauche choices for nouveau riffraff. I told him he had the palate of a drunk sheep. Touché, I said. She. Let that sit before continuing. But that doesn't make me a murderer. He choked. It was sudden. Nobody had time to poison his food. And believe me, if it had been the wine, I'd have known. Were you near him when it happened? Wolfe asked. I was across the room. I saw him slump, coughing. We all thought it was a dramatic review tactic until he hit the floor. And afterward? She crossed her legs carefully. Afterward, I left Traviata within a month. Too many whispers. I started a consultancy and never looked back until now. Wolfe eyed her like he was tasting tannins in her story. You feel no unease attending this dinner? I feel annoyed, she said. This is a vanity project for Adrian Barron. He wants a glossy group photo with a tragic past and a bright future. What he'll get is indigestion. Wolfe dismissed her with emotion. She left with the same poise she came in with, but there was a tightness in her back that hadn't been there before. I made a note. She's brittle, I said, but I didn't get murder. Brittle things break, Wolfe said. And broken people sometimes try to fix the past with violence. I let that marinate while waiting for Maury Bragg. He arrived exactly 5 minutes late, wearing a rumpled coat and smelling like burnt rosemary and fatigue. His hands were red and chapped, signs of recent kitchen labor, and his posture screamed regret even before he opened his mouth. I wasn't told this would be an interrogation, he muttered. It isn't, Wolfe said, unless you require it to be. Maury sat down, looked at me, then at Wolfe, and finally at the ceiling. Claudia called you, didn't she? I warned Adrian she might pull something like this. You disapprove of her inclusion at the dinner? I disapprove of this whole charade. Greaves died. Yes, it was a mess. It stained us all, but it was years ago. Tell us about the duck, Wolfe said suddenly. Maury blinked. The duck? The one Greaves was eating. Claudia believes it may not have been an accident. Maury's face darkened like soup left on the flame too long. It was confit de canard, cured overnight, crisped skin. Nothing exotic, and I didn't poison it. If that's where you're going, you can save the breath. Who else had access to the plates before service? Me, obviously. My sous chef, who left the industry 2 months after that night. Yvette handled the pairings and the servers, but they didn't come near the duck before it hit the table. No garnish? No final touch? Maury paused. Just a drizzle. I added a port cherry reduction. Myself. And no one else touched it? Not to my knowledge. Did Greaves eat all of it? No. Just a few bites. Then he started coughing. I thought he was faking, trying to be clever. He wasn't. I know. The silence thickened, broken only by the ticking of the office clock. Do you think it was murder? Wolfe asked. Maury exhaled hard. I've tried not to. I've told myself it was an accident. But some nights, and I remember that look in his eyes, and I wonder, did anyone have a reason? His mouth tightened. Any of them could have. Greaves was a sadist with a column. But if you're asking who had the nerve, maybe Felix, he hated being made a fool of. Maybe Adrian, he needed Greaves' approval more than the rest of us. Or maybe Carmela. She used to say Greaves mocked. Her career to punish her for turning him down. Wolfe grunted. Thank you, Mr. Bragg, that will be all. Maury left slowly, dragging his guilt like an invisible duffel. Wolfe didn't speak until the door closed. 2 liars, he said, and 1 honest man. How you think Bragg's clean? I think he would sooner butcher himself than sabotage his own kitchen. That narrows the list. And Claudia? Her instincts are not incorrect. She fears something because something is being orchestrated. You think Adrian Barron set this all up for more than nostalgia? I think Mr. Barron has plans beyond reconciliation, and those plans may include a final act. I leaned forward. So what's next? Wolfe reached for the phone. We set the table? He called Saul Panzer, in code naturally. Saul knew how to slip in and out of public places with the grace of a fog bank and the eyes of a hawk with a grudge. After he hung up, Wolfe turned to me. Tomorrow, he said, you will accompany Claudia to the dinner. As a guest? As an observer, sit near Barron, watch what he drinks, what he says, who he watches, and be ready. For what? Wolfe closed his eyes. For the moment, someone realizes they have only 1 course left, and with that the day was done, though the table, Wolfe said, was just beginning to be set. The next evening, I stood outside Rusterman's in a suit. Wolfe approved of only because it wasn't loud enough to offend the upholstery in his office. Claudia was already there, shivering slightly in a deep green coat that made her look more composed than I suspected she felt. She nodded when she saw me and gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I told Adrian you were coming, she said. Told him you were a food writer. Sure, I said. Let's hope nobody asks what I think of Perigord truffles this season. Inside, the maitre d' led us to private dining room C, which had been set with enough precision to make Wolfe weep. Crystal gleamed. Napkins were sculpted like swans. The place settings could have passed inspection at Buckingham Palace. Adrian Barron was already seated at the head of the table, with Felix Troy to his right and Carmela Guidis to his left. They were sipping something golden, sauternes probably, and chatting like old friends who remembered which knife to use for the scallops. Adrian stood when we entered, square-jawed, confident, dressed like a man who never waited in line. He smiled at Claudia, then at me. "Glad you could join us," he said, extending a hand. "So you're Archie, the food critic?" "Of sorts," I said. "I observe how people chew." He laughed politely, not sure if I was kidding. Claudia took the seat beside him, and I took the one next to her, directly across from Felix Troy, who gave me a look that might have peeled wallpaper. Yvette arrived next, her scarf looped just so, followed by Maury Bragg, whose clothes were pressed but whose eyes looked like they hadn't seen sleep since the Hoover administration. The courses started promptly. First up, a small plate of escargot with garlic butter and parsley foam. The table buzzed with casual chatter about restaurants, Michelin stars and food trends, the kind of conversation that usually ends with someone being quoted in Bon Appetit. But under the surface, tension hummed. I watched Adrian closely. He was charming, attentive to Claudia, respectful to Carmela, quick to refill wine glasses without making a show of it. But something about the way he glanced at Felix when Claudia spoke, too fast, too frequent, made my radar beep. Second course, roasted beet salad with hazelnut vinaigrette. No poison in sight, unless you count pretension. I leaned slightly toward Claudia, feeling safer, I murmured. "I don't know," she said softly. "I keep thinking, what if it's already started?" Adrian raised his glass. "To reconciliation," he said, "and to Traviata. May it rest in infamy." Glasses clinked. I sipped. Claudia didn't. Yvette spoke next. "I still remember the smell of that kitchen," she said, voice smooth. "Duck fat, thyme, sweat. We were too ambitious for that space." And under too much scrutiny, Carmela added, "Greaves was circling like a shark." "Until he choked," Felix said, his voice dry. Silence. Adrian cleared his throat. "Unfortunate, yes, but we've all moved on, haven't we?" Maury didn't answer. His hands were on the table, fingers drumming in sync with his pulse. I caught his eyes and gave the slightest shake of my head. Don't give anything away. The entree arrived. Lamb chops with a black garlic juice and a quenelle of truffled potato. Forks moved, knives sliced. Conversation resumed. "So, Archie," Yvette said, eyes flicking over me. "What's your angle?" "Right now," I said. "Medium rare if the kitchen knows what it's doing." A few chuckled. Claudia didn't. "Have you written about this dinner?" she asked. "No," I said, watching Adrian, "but someone might." Dessert was chocolate soufflé with blood orange crème anglaise. Dramatic. Symbolic, if you were the literary type. Or maybe just the chef's idea of a flourish. Adrian made a toast as the plates were set down. "To healing old wounds," he said, "and knowing when to let go." Carmela raised a brow. "Is that what this is about? Letting go? Or showing who's still in charge?" Adrian didn't flinch. "If I wanted to show power, Carmela, I wouldn't need a dinner party." The soufflés deflated in more ways than one. It was then that Maury pushed his plate back, half-eaten. "I can't eat this," he said abruptly. "Sorry. Too rich?" Yvette asked, eyebrows arched. He didn't answer. His face had gone greyish. I stood. "Maury?" He rose too fast. His chair toppled. His hand went to his throat, and a sound came out. Half cough, half wheeze. "No." Claudia said, breathless. "Water!" someone shouted. But I was already moving, grabbing Maury's arm, helping him lean against the wall, as I patted his back and tried to keep him from keeling over. His breath rattled. His lips had gone pale. "Call." "A doctor," Adrian said. "Now!" The maitre d' appeared like magic. Felix was dialing on his phone. Carmela stood, frozen. Yvette set down her glass without drinking. Claudia looked at me like I was the only sane man in the room. Maury gasped, then bent over and vomited into the potted fern by the sideboard. When he straightened, he was shaking but conscious. "It's okay," he croaked. "It's passing." "You sure?" I asked. He nodded barely. Not poison. I know what it was. A nut. Hazelnut. From the salad. Damn vinaigrette. Allergy? I asked. Yes, I forgot to mention it. Idiot. Wolfe would have a field day with that. Adrian exhaled. Thank God, that's a relief. Maury sat down again, still pale. Sorry, he mumbled. Didn't mean to derail. But derail it had. The atmosphere was a busted souffle, fallen and flat. Nobody touched dessert. I stayed close to Claudia as people gathered their things. Adrian approached me. Thanks for helping, he said. You kept your head. It's the only part of me Wolfe likes, I said, his brow furrowed. Wolfe? I work for him, he blinked. You're not a food critic. No. But I do watch how people chew. He looked at me long and hard. You're investigating Claudia's theory. She thinks someone might try again. After tonight, he said quietly, I'm starting to agree. He left with Claudia, arm around her shoulder. Felix and Yvette left together, murmuring. Carmela disappeared without a goodbye. Maury insisted he'd walk it off. I called Saul from the sidewalk. Follow Adrian and Claudia, I said. Watch who watches them. I got back to the brownstone. Past 11. Wolfe was still up, book closed, lamp on, eyes alert. Well, he said. Nobody died, I said. But someone came close. I told him the whole story, course by course, word by word. When I was done, he sat back. Interesting, he said. That's all? No. You were right. About what? He smiled thinly. It has started. Wolfe didn't say anything for a long moment after I wrapped my debrief. He let silence stretch like a cat waking up from a nap. Luxurious, indulgent, and just tense enough to get under your skin. I stood across from his desk, jacket off, tie loosened, the weight of the evening settling on me like steam from Fritz's. Bouillabaisse. Finally, Wolfe reached for the Turkish cigarette he'd been pretending not to want, and tapped it twice against the ivory dish. Maury Bragg nearly dies, he said, lighting up, and the only man in the room who seems genuinely alarmed is the one you suspect of orchestrating the event. Adrian looked shocked. Sure, I said, but that doesn't mean he didn't know something might happen. Maybe he didn't expect Maury to be the one gasping for air. Perhaps. Or perhaps it wasn't intended at all. I frowned. You're thinking it was coincidence? He gave me a look fit for a rookie at their first crime scene. Coincidence is the last refuge of the unimaginative, he muttered. No. I believe what happened was a signal, a prod, a test. For who? For all of them. Someone wanted to see how the group would react, who would panic, who would retreat. Claudia's presence, your own, even Bragg's allergy, it presented a perfect pressure point. Then the salad was tampered with. Possibly not at all. Possibly it was precisely what the kitchen intended. But if someone knew Bragg's allergy, knew it and let it ride, that tells us something about intent. Let it ride. Deliberate negligence is a form of action, Wolfe said, exhaling smoke that curled above the desk like punctuation. Our antagonist may not have needed to kill, only to shake the cage. Well, they succeeded. Yvette was rattled. Felix, too, even Adrian was off balance. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Tell me about Baron. He played host like a pro. Calm, witty, charming. But every time Claudia opened her mouth, he flicked his eyes to Troy like he was checking her lines. Against the script. Script? Figure of speech, I said. But maybe not far off. Wolfe drummed his fingers on the armrest. And Miss Lisa? On edge. But not hysterical. She kept scanning the room like she expected to see something out of place. She may have, Wolfe said. We must ask her. He picked up the phone and instructed me to arrange a meeting for the next morning. When Claudia arrived at 10 sharp, she was dressed in slacks and a navy sweater. her hair pinned back with a degree of symmetry that hinted at compulsive control. She sat down with both hands clasped and nodded politely to Wolfe before looking at me. "I told you someone would try something." Wolfe regarded her with mild detachment. "You told Mr. Goodwin you feared someone would act, but fear and foresight are not the same." Her jaw clenched. "Maury almost died, but he didn't. And what's more intriguing, if we believe his version, is that he triggered the reaction himself. Do you think that was planned?" "No," she said immediately. "He looked genuinely scared." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "So if we assume the incident was a provocation rather than an attempt, who benefits?" Claudia looked at me, then back at Wolfe. "Whoever wants to scare us, or test the waters, maybe see how much we remember about that night." "Do you remember?" Wolfe asked. "Accurately." "I was working the door, seating VIPs. I remember Greaves arriving late. He was already in a mood, and I remember, after the duck, he started coughing. It was awful, loud, theatrical. We all thought it was an act. Then he collapsed." "Who reached him first?" "Adrian," she said. "He rushed to help, then shouted for an ambulance. He tried the Heimlich. I think Felix helped, but I can't swear to it. Where were you when that happened?" "I was about 20 feet away near the bar. And afterward, we all were told to keep quiet. The police took statements. The restaurant never reopened." Wolfe nodded, slow and deliberate. "You said Greaves threatened to publish something damaging about you." "Yes, what was it?" Claudia hesitated. Then, "He had copies of emails. Messages I sent to a food supplier asking them to cut corners, to substitute a lower-grade foie gras for a special we were running. I was young, stupid, and trying to impress Adrian. He was opening a new place, and I wanted in. Did anyone else know?" "I think Maury suspected. He confronted me once, said it would blow back on all of us. I begged him not to say anything. And Greaves. He told me he'd give me a week to confess to management. Said if I didn't, he'd run a full expose. And then he died." Claudia swallowed hard. "Yes." Wolfe's eyes stayed on her for a beat longer than comfort allowed. Then he nodded. "Thank you, Miss Lisa. That was instructive." After she left, I stayed leaning on the edge of the desk, arms folded. "Well, that opens a few doors," I said. "You think someone killed Greaves to protect Claudia?" "No," Wolfe said. "I think someone used Claudia's mistake to provoke Greaves, and that what followed may have been spontaneous, or not. And now someone's using the memory of it to rattle the whole cage." "Exactly. The phone rang. I picked it up. It was Saul. "I've got something," he said. "Caught Felix Troy meeting with Carmela this morning. Not in public, her place. He left after 15 minutes. Friendly? Didn't look it. No smiles, no kiss on the cheek. More like negotiation." I relayed that to Wolfe. He nodded. "Time. To speak with Mr. Troy again," he said. "Bring him here tonight. And if he refuses, he won't." He didn't. Felix showed up at 7:45 p.m., crisp and annoyed. He sat like he was tolerating a particularly boring board meeting. "What's this about?" he asked. "Another dinner analysis?" Wolfe folded his hands. "You visited Miss Gwydys this morning." Felix didn't blink. "She owed me a bottle. I was collecting. You didn't stay for a drink?" "I don't drink her recommendations." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You were discussing leverage, not wine." Felix's lips pressed together. "This is absurd." "No." "It's inevitable," Wolfe said. "Someone in that room believes the past isn't buried, and someone else believes they must control the story before it resurfaces. Then talk to Adrian," Felix said. "He's the one who dragged us all back into the same room. He wants control. He needs it. His consortium's been bleeding cash. He needs clean press, a redemption arc." "You dislike him?" "I think he's a fraud." "Did you poison Greaves?" "No." Did you help someone do it? No. Wolfe studied him, then gave a slight nod. Thank you. That will be all, for now. After Troy left, I exhaled. He's sweating, I said. Not yet, Wolfe replied, but he will. He looked at me, expression sharpening. Tomorrow we call the circle back. This time here in my office, I blinked. All of them? Yes. The table is no longer set at Rusterman's, it's here, and I will preside. The trap, in other words, was ready to close, and Wolfe, patient, immovable, and very much in control, was already adjusting the tension on the spring. By the time the sun burned off the last of the morning haze, the brownstone was a different kind of battleground. Wolfe had Fritz polish the brass doorknob again, and Theodore was warned not to disturb the upstairs orchids under any circumstances, not for watering, misting, or philosophizing about varietals. I got the signal to set the chairs, 6 for our guests, all of them placed with the kind of symmetry you usually only find in orchestral seating or military tribunals. Wolfe's chair stayed, as always, behind the desk, a throne and a trap, depending on who was in the room. At 10 minutes, past noon, the last of the guests arrived. Claudia came first, followed by Maury Bragg, pale but steady. Carmela was cool and silent, giving Felix a look that could have frozen crème brûlée when he walked in a few minutes later. Adrian Barron, punctual as a power broker, arrived last, crisp in a navy suit, and a smile that was too clean to be sincere. Yvette slipped in after him, carrying the scent of white musk and damage control. Wolfe didn't bother with greetings. He lifted his chin an inch, which in his dialect was equal to rising and shaking hands. "You have all dined," he began, "and spoken and reminisced. You have made toasts. You have shared wine, and at least one of you has resumed something. Much older. Manipulation." The room shifted. Felix sat straighter. Carmela crossed her arms. Adrian kept smiling, but it had gone brittle at the edges. "Before I continue," Wolfe said, "I must be clear. I do not care whether Landon Greaves died by misadventure, accident, or design. The past cannot be undone. But what concerns me, and what Miss Liss has brought to my attention, is the fact that someone among you is unwilling to leave that past undisturbed." Adrian cleared his throat. "Mr. Wolfe, if I may, this is becoming rather theatrical. Pfui. You engineered a dinner that reunited 6 people tied to a scandalous death. You fed them courses from a defunct restaurant's ghost menu and served the whole thing on a platter of nostalgia and tension. You hoped to rebrand the event, control it, but you failed. I hosted a dinner," Adrian said. "That's all. Claudia asked you to investigate something that hasn't even happened. The worst thing that came out of the night was a minor allergy flare-up." "Maury Bragg is not a minor man," Wolfe said, "and that was no mere coincidence. Someone allowed his known allergy to surface without interference, perhaps to gauge reactions, perhaps to send a message." All eyes went to Maury, who reddened, then muttered, "I should have told the kitchen, I just forgot." "No," Wolfe said, "you were not supposed to remember. Someone else was supposed to, and they didn't, or wouldn't." Carmela shifted in her seat. "You think it was one of us?" Wolfe's eyes flicked to her. "I know it was one of you," Yvette gave a quiet scoff. "Then prove it." Archie and I had anticipated that line, and I stepped forward with the flourish Wolfe would never stoop to perform. "You all remember the duck Greaves was eating the night he died," I said. "What most people forget is that it was served with a cherry port reduction, something Maury made himself." "So?" Felix asked. "So," I continued, "we went through the old recipes. Fritz, Wolfe's chef, dug them out of culinary journals and supplier invoices. That reduction used to include a finishing element, ground bitter almond, very slight, just enough to lay a flavor and aroma, removed from the dish after the Greaves incident, but still part of the original." Maury sat up sharply. That's right. We cut it afterward, didn't want anything that could even suggest poison. Except, Wolfe said, resuming, it wasn't the duck that killed Greaves, not directly. There was no cyanide, no toxin. What there was, however, was a consistent rumor, spread cleverly, that Greaves had suffered a reaction, that he'd had food sensitivities. Yvette exhaled. He didn't. No. But if you say he did, you reframe the entire incident. You make it sound medical, unpreventable, not murder, just unfortunate. Carmela said. You're saying we lied? You were lied to, Wolfe said, and someone here liked it that way. Adrian's voice was tight. This is speculative. Hardly. Miss Liss has revealed that she was threatened by Greaves shortly before his death. He had information that could have destroyed her credibility. That information in turn would have tainted Traviata, and by extension you, Mr. Baron. Adrian opened his mouth, but Wolfe cut him off. You needed silence. Greaves was not inclined to give it. You didn't poison him, but you knew how. To direct the aftermath. You ensured that no one would look too closely, and when Claudia suggested reopening the question, you staged the dinner. You brought them together again, not to heal, but to contain. To watch, to intimidate, and perhaps to decide whether a second silencing was necessary. Adrian stood abruptly. This is absurd. You have no proof. On the contrary, Mr. Panzer observed you and Felix Troy in conference last week, reviewing documents. Shortly after, you and Miss Gwydys met, under the pretense of exchanging wine. In fact, you were rehearsing positions, preparing contingencies. You're twisting this, Felix snapped. Am I? Or is it simply that the truth, once folded and pressed long enough, no longer resembles itself? Maury's voice came low and stunned. You knew Greaves was going to expose Claudia, and you let it happen. Adrian didn't respond. He was glaring at Wolfe like a man who'd suddenly realized his deck was short a queen. Claudia's voice, quiet but firm, cut through the tension. You let me think I was safe. I didn't kill him, Adrian said. He choked, that's all. But you did nothing, she said. And you're still doing it. Wolfe spoke again, his voice final. There will be no police, not yet. You have committed no chargeable crime unless further investigation reveals otherwise. But this charade ends here. If any of you attempt to influence Miss Liss again, or suppress the truth, I will see to it that your consortium collapses under the weight of its own cowardice. No one spoke. Silence was a verdict. Wolfe turned to me. Archie. I opened the door. One by one they filed out, some furious, some shaken. Felix went first, shoulders stiff. Carmela offered no words. Yvette glanced back once. Maury nodded slightly, like a man grateful to be spared a sentence he thought had already been passed. Adrian paused at the threshold. You win, Wolfe, he said. Always, Wolfe replied without inflection. When they were gone, Claudia stood in the middle of the office, uncertain. Wolfe said, not unkindly, Miss Liss, you are free to speak. To the press, to the public, or to no one at all, the truth is yours again. She nodded. Thank you, she turned to me. That offer to get a stake, does it still stand? Only if I pick the place, I said. She smiled. A real one, this. Time, and left. I turned to Wolfe, who was already reaching for his book. You think Adrian will keep quiet? He will, Wolfe said. Men who trade in influence rarely enjoy being influenced. And Greaves, Wolfe's fingers paused over the page. Landon Greaves died because he believed in exposure over discretion. He was punished for it. Not with poison, but with silence. And justice, Wolfe's eyes flicked to me, heavy-lidded and full of finality. Justice, Mr. Goodwin, is rarely a satisfying dish. But tonight it has been served. Then he opened his book and vanished into print, leaving me standing in the doorway, notebook in hand, and the faint echo of a table where murder once waited, but did not come. By the time the last of the suspects had cleared the brownstone, the air felt like it had finally exhaled. I stood in the front hall for a few beats, listening to the silence as if it might offer an epilogue. Wolfe had already returned to his book, the dust jacket removed, the spine balanced on the crook of his hand like a sleeping cat. I'd seen him like that 1,000 times, but tonight it didn't feel like an end. It felt like something was still turning. I walked back into the office and leaned against the edge of the desk. "You weren't bluffing about the police," I said. "But you didn't call them either." Wolfe didn't look up. "There is as yet no corpse." "Still." I said, "You called it justice just now, served cold. That's not like you." "I said it had been served. I didn't say by whom." I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. "Adrian won't do anything else," I said. "His leverage is gone. Claudia could take the whole thing to a blog, a newspaper, even the consortium. Board if she wanted. If she talks, the truth's out and Adrian's cooked." "He won't risk it," Wolfe murmured. "I don't think Felix will either. He's got too much money tied up in that wine business of his to get dragged into a scandal. Carmela, she's slippery, but she'd sell her side of the story faster than she'd drink an unfiltered Beaujolais." Wolfe raised his eyes just slightly. "And Bragg?" Too rattled to be guilty of anything but second-hand guilt. Besides, if someone had told him to keep quiet all those years, he'd have cracked long before now. Wolfe tapped a finger against the open book. "That leaves Miss Rollins." I paused. "You're not serious?" "She knew the original recipe," he said. "She remembered the almond reduction. Her silence, combined with her consulting role at the time, would have lent weight to the accident narrative." I nodded slowly. "But she was also the one who said Greaves had it coming." "That doesn't scream cover-up. That sounds like someone who wishes she'd had the guts to finish the job, or someone clever enough to make you believe she didn't." There was a small silence while I chewed that over. "You think she was behind the allergy incident?" Wolfe didn't answer directly. "Miss Rollins has spent her career refining taste, knowing how much of what to add, what to suppress. She is accustomed to perception as performance." "But no motive," I said. "She didn't benefit from Greaves's death. If anything, she lost work. Not motive," Wolfe said, "but method and proximity and silence." The phone rang then, slicing the room. I picked it up. "Goodwin." It was Saul Panzer. "I thought you might want to know," he said. "Yvette Rollins just met with a man from a boutique law firm downtown. Whitestone and Kern. They specialize in preemptive damage control. For public figures, executives, people caught in scandal, usually with a PR component." I met Wolfe's eyes. He gave the smallest of nods. "She's bracing for a blow," I said. "Or shaping one," Wolfe murmured. After I hung up, I walked to the window. Outside, the afternoon light had gone soft, the way it does when winter is flirting with spring. Warm enough to hope, cold enough to remind you not to pack the coats just yet. "She's not going to wait," I said. "If Claudia talks, Yvette will be implicated, even if she wasn't directly involved. And if she was, she will move soon," Wolfe said. "To redirect, to silence, possibly to discredit Claudia." "Yes." I started toward the phone again. Wolfe stopped me with a word. "No, no. She is not to be warned yet. It would provoke defensiveness. Let Miss Rollins act just enough. You're baiting her. She intends to act. I intend to know precisely how. For a man who never left the house, Wolfe could make a room feel like a chessboard. He had the whole thing laid out in his head, where the pawns were nudging forward, who'd already sacrificed their bishop and which queen was about to slip off the edge. I spent the next few hours going through Claudia's old emails. Copies she had given us from her correspondence with Greaves, the supplier, and Adrian Barron. They painted a picture of someone who'd made a mistake and then spent a decade trying not to repeat it. She hadn't built a new life. She'd been surviving one. Around 6, the doorbell rang. It was Claudia. I wasn't sure if I should come. she said. "But I needed to talk to someone who isn't part of that circle." I let her in. Wolfe stayed where he was, acknowledging her with a tilt of the head. "Miss Lisa," he said. "Something's happened." "Yes," she said. "Yvette called me just an hour ago. She wants to meet, said she wants to offer me a deal." I looked at Wolfe. He looked at Claudia. "What kind of deal?" I asked. She didn't say. Just that she wanted to clear the air and offer me a better path forward. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "A euphemism for silence. Where does she want to meet?" "Tomorrow." 10 a.m. a private table at a cafe in the West Village. She said it's quiet, discreet. "Of course she did," Wolfe muttered. "She intends to record you, or trap you into agreeing not to speak. Should I go?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "And Archie will go with you, not at the table, across the room. And if she tries anything—" "She will," Wolfe said. "That is the point." Claudia gave a small, tight nod. "I'm not afraid of her." "Good," Wolfe said. "Fear? Miss Lisa is natural, but what matters is where you place it." After she left, Wolfe turned to me. "You will attend the meeting. You will watch her eyes, not her mouth. The eyes tell you when a person is lying. Mouths are trained, eyes are involuntary. And if she's got something else planned, you will stop her. Physically, if required." "Well," I said, "so much for a quiet morning." Wolfe returned to his book with the same motion he used to lift a fork, precise, uninterested in interruption. "Be subtle," he said without looking up, "but be ready." And with that, the board was set again. The final pieces poised, the trap nearly sprung. We had moved from theory to execution. The dinner was over, but breakfast, it turned out, would be lethal. At 9:52 the next morning, I was already seated at a corner table in the West Village Cafe Yvette had picked. Discreet, as she'd put it, which turned out to mean a place with stone walls, mediocre espresso, and enough noise to keep voices from carrying. I had a clear view of the meeting table, tucked halfway down the row of windows, close enough to the kitchen that the scent of saffron and old garlic butter lingered in the air. Claudia walked in on the dot. She wore a grey trench and no makeup, her hair pulled back into a practical knot that told you she wasn't there for charm. Yvette was already seated, draped in her usual elegance, sipping from a porcelain cup like she'd trained at the Sorbonne. Her smile was polished, and it landed just south of sincere. I shifted my angle slightly, opened the post, and kept my eyes on the space between the folds of the page. The waiter offered me a menu. I declined. I already had my dish. They didn't. "Shake hands." Claudia sat, her posture straight but not stiff, like she'd rehearsed how much room to give and no more. "I didn't come here to be bribed," she said. "Of course not," Yvette replied, calm. "And I didn't come here to bribe you." "I'm listening." Yvette leaned forward a bit. "You want to talk about the past, I understand, but you have to realize something. When people like us dig it up, it doesn't hurt just one person. It spreads, it stains." Claudia's jaw moved, but she didn't speak. "I know you think Adrian manipulated you. Maybe he did. I wouldn't defend him. But the scandal you're about to relaunch, it won't stop at him. It will touch all of us, Troy, Carmela, Maury, even you." Yvette reached into her bag, not too quickly, but I still flexed slightly in my seat, and produced a small manila envelope. "This is not hush money," she said. "This is a way out. A statement you can sign, if you choose, to say you no longer wish to speak publicly about the Greaves incident. In exchange, you'll receive compensation. Discreetly, from the consortium. Not Adrian personally. Not me. A gesture, that's all." Claudia stared at the envelope, didn't touch it. "How much?" Yvette quoted a number. It wasn't small. It was also, if you knew Claudia, an insult. Claudia let the silence hang before she spoke. "You were there that night," she said. "You saw him choking?" "I did. And you went along with the story." "I protected what was left," Yvette said softly. "There was no evidence of a crime. There was a man threatening to expose all of you, Claudia snapped. And then he died at your table. I didn't kill him. No, Claudia said, but I think you liked watching him fall. That earned a pause. Then Yvette said carefully, You're angry, I understand. But don't mistake that for clarity. Claudia stood. You can keep the envelope. Yvette didn't flinch. You'll regret this. Claudia walked out. I gave it 5 seconds, then stood, dropped enough of the coffee I didn't drink, and followed her onto the street. She was walking fast, but not frantically. I caught up beside her. You did good, I said. I don't feel good. She wanted you to sign away your voice. That tells us she knows the truth matters. She still thinks she's protected, Claudia said. She was trying to protect something, I agreed. Not herself. Adrian. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was at his desk. Fritz had just delivered his second bottle of beer. I gave him the rundown from the envelope to the veiled threat. He listened without moving, as if the details were familiar, expected. When I finished, he nodded once. Miss Rollins has chosen the only path left to her, he said. Suppression. She's worried, I said, but not desperate. She will be. What's our move? Wolfe reached for the envelope Claudia had handed me on our way back, a duplicate now. She hadn't opened it, but I had, with gloves and tweezers. Inside wasn't just the statement Yvette had offered. There was also a list, names, amounts, payouts. It's not hush money, Wolfe said. It's a balance sheet. I stared. You think she's done this before? She didn't offer a bribe in panic. She offered it with a template. Wholly, I suspect Greaves wasn't her first inconvenience, but he may have been her first mistake. I picked up the phone and dialed Saul. Told him to start digging into Yvette's past consulting contracts, looking for other sudden resignations. Lawsuits dropped. Chefs who vanished from the press. Claudia, who'd stayed quiet near the door, finally spoke. Do you think she had something to do with it back then? She knew what Greaves was planning to publish, Wolfe said. She didn't act alone, but she helped create the climate that killed him. Claudia crossed the room slowly, her voice low. Then I want her held responsible. Wolfe nodded. She will be. 2 hours later, we had enough. Saul found a former sommelier in Chicago. Took a deal to disappear after threatening to sue one of Adrian's earliest ventures for manipulation of wine certification claims. Yvette had been the fixer. The payment matched one of the names on the list. I made the call to Inspector Kramer. He didn't like being brought in late, but when I explained Wolfe's angle, fraud, financial coercion, a pattern of silencing, witnesses with preemptive money, he stopped grumbling and agreed to send someone over. Especially after I mentioned Claudia was willing to go on the record. That evening, Wolfe sat in his chair, full from Fritz's duck à l'orange, staring at the dark window as the city exhaled into night. She won't go down for murder, I said. No, he agreed, but she'll be undone. And in her world, that is worse. Claudia stood in the doorway. It's over, isn't it? For now, Wolfe said. But these things echo. You should be ready for that. She nodded. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe, he didn't reply. Just inclined his head like a magistrate who had finally closed his docket. After she left, I sat across from him, a glass of beer in hand. You didn't like this one? No. Too messy? Too human. I grinned. You say that like it's a fault. He sighed. It is, Mr. Goodwin, but it is not one easily solved. The phone didn't ring. The door stayed closed. And somewhere in the city, a woman who had spent her career silencing trouble found herself finally unable to quiet what mattered most. Not the past, but the truth. The next morning was unusually quiet at the brownstone. No phone calls, no unexpected visitors, no sighs of indignation from Wolfe over the Times crossword clues. Just the soft rattle of cutlery from Fritz in the kitchen and the barely audible sound of Wolfe turning pages in his chair. It should have been a signal that the storm had passed. But I've worked with Wolfe long enough to know that when everything seems resolved, that's when the last stone drops. I was halfway through a cinnamon roll, courtesy of Fritz's temporary obsession with Viennese baking, when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock. 9:11. Early, even for a client. Wolfe didn't call out, so I went to the door. It was Adrian Barron. He stood on the stoop like he was still posing for press photos, crisp shirt under a light camel overcoat, jaw clean-shaven, expression calm but drawn. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Mr. Barron," I said, stepping aside. "Back so soon?" He stepped in without waiting for the invitation. The look on his face said this wasn't a courtesy visit, and I didn't smell desperation, which meant it was something else. Calculation, probably. I led him into the office. Wolfe didn't stand or speak. He lifted his eyes over the edge of his book, just enough to make Adrian aware of how much effort it cost him to acknowledge his presence. "I heard about Miss Rollins," Adrian said. Wolfe said nothing. "I also heard the police are speaking to people on my staff. People I hired long after Traviata closed. They don't even know who Greaves was." "That may be," Wolfe replied, "but they know you. And in these matters, the past is not defined by when it occurred, but by when it stopped being useful. I'm not here to debate time," Adrian said. "I'm here to ask if Claudia intends to go public." "She is free to do so," Wolfe said. "That was the arrangement." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You don't think this is over, do you?" "No," Wolfe said simply, "because it isn't." I stayed back, arms folded. Adrian turned toward me, his gaze sharp but not hostile. "I didn't kill Greaves," he said. "You know that." "Maybe," I said, "but you certainly let him die, and now you're here because you're realizing there are worse things than guilt, like exposure." He turned back to Wolfe. "I want to offer her a settlement. Not to silence her, just to end this with some dignity." "She is not interested in your dignity," Wolfe said, "or your money." Adrian's voice lowered. "She could destroy my career." "She could," Wolfe agreed. There was a long silence. Adrian's breath tightened in his chest. "If you think I manipulated that dinner to provoke her—" "I know you did," Wolfe interrupted, "and you failed." Adrian straightened, like a man who'd just remembered he still had some pride tucked into a back pocket. "Then let me make something clear," he said. "If she takes this public, I won't fight it. I'll let it burn. But I won't take the fall for something I didn't do, which means I'll testify about Yvette, about the meetings, the way she handled Greaves, about how far she was willing to go. I have emails, statements she gave me to review. She was grooming narratives before Claudia ever reached out to you." That got Wolfe's attention. He sat forward half an inch, which, by Wolfe's standards, is the equivalent of someone jumping on a desk and screaming. "You withheld this," he said. "I wasn't going to go down with her unless I had to. Now I might have to." "You still might." Adrian pulled a flash drive from his pocket and set it on Wolfe's desk. "Everything I have," he said. "Emails, notes, a version of the press statement she drafted for me after Greaves's death. It makes her sound like a bystander, but she was more like an editor of reality." Wolfe gave a small grunt. "I doubt you came only to unburden yourself," he said. "I came because I'm tired of being afraid of what she started." After he left, Wolfe didn't speak. He turned the flash drive between his fingers once, twice, then set it down precisely in line with the edge of his blotter. "You believe him?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said, "but I believe his fear." "Will it help Claudia?" "It will confirm what she already knows. And it may be enough to dismantle Yvette's protections. Then we move forward?" "No," he said, "we finish." It took the rest of the afternoon for Saul to verify the documents. Nothing forged, nothing conveniently edited. The drafts showed Yvette shaping the public response from the moment Greaves was pronounced dead. Phrases like a sudden health event, and we mourn his loss and respect his family's privacy, language built to soften and obscure. It didn't prove she'd had a direct hand in anything lethal, but it showed clear intention to contain the fallout and conceal the prior tensions with Claudia. By dusk, Kramer had what he needed to formally reopen the Greaves case, not as a homicide, but as a probable negligent death with concealed contributing factors. It wasn't the kind of headline that sells novels, but it was the kind that reopens files. Enough, Wolfe said, for the truth to bleed through. I met Claudia for coffee that evening. This time, it was her choice of cafe. Bright windows, no corners. To hide in. She seemed lighter, though not quite light. "He came to you, didn't he?" she asked. "Adrian?" "Yeah." With a thumb drive full of guilt. She looked down into her cup. "He wanted me to stay quiet. Not with a threat. With regret." "He'll still be implicated," I said. "Not as the hand behind it, but the one." "Who set the table?" She nodded. "That's fair. Are you going public?" "Not yet," she said, "but I'll talk to the police. I'll help them fill in what Greaves couldn't." I didn't press. She had survived a long time by staying silent. She had to learn how to speak in her own rhythm. When I got back, Wolfe was halfway through a book on Roman agriculture and wouldn't acknowledge me until I interrupted him with a summary of Claudia's position. She'll testify, but she wants to stay out of the press for now. Wolfe didn't look up. "Wise. You think she'll be okay?" "She has returned the burden," he said. "That is the beginning of peace, though not its guarantee." I poured myself a beer and sat down. "You think there'll be another Greaves?" "There is always another Greaves," he said. "Truth is impolite, Mr. Goodwin. It enters uninvited and leaves behind a mess. People don't like cleaning. No. Which is why they hire us." Outside, the city moved on. Impatient, indifferent, noisy. Somewhere a dinner reservation was being made. Somewhere else a reviewer was sharpening a pen. Inside the brownstone, Wolfe turned a page and let the silence resume. And this time, it felt like the last word. The following day slipped in without drama. No knocks, no phone calls, no envelopes slipped through the door bearing threats or checks. The city, as always, continued on, without noticing who'd just been spared or condemned. And the brownstone, the only universe Wolfe acknowledged with any consistency, resumed its natural, deliberate rhythm. He was in the plant rooms all morning, checking on his orchids, while I handled 2 overdue reports, a phone call from Saul confirming that Kramer had officially subpoenaed Yvette Rollins, and 1 bland note from a former client wanting Wolfe's opinion on a cookbook manuscript, which I quietly disposed of without consultation. Wolfe emerged at 11:50, as regular as a cathedral bell, and took his seat at the office desk. I was already there, leaned back in the red chair, tapping a pencil against my knee. "I presume," he said, "that Miss Rollins has been informed of her forthcoming appointment with the police." "She has," I said. "Saul's man saw her take the envelope this morning. Her face didn't change much, but she cancelled 2 meetings afterward." He gave a small grunt. "And the others?" "Felix Troy is trying to pretend he was never part of any of it. Carmela has already offered to cooperate, with an implied expectation of consulting opportunities once the dust settles. Maury Bragg sent flowers to Claudia. And Adrian?" "Yes?" "He's disappeared. Not entirely. Just enough to make a point." Wolfe tilted his head slightly. "That he regrets?" "That he retreats, quietly, with decorum." He nodded once. "He's learned. Too late. For most things," Wolfe said, "but not all." It was almost noon when the doorbell rang. It wasn't Claudia. It wasn't Saul. It wasn't even a messenger bearing legal papers or pastries. It was Yvette Rollins. She stood on the stoop in her sharpest coat and most expensive shoes, with the expression of someone who had been trained to cross picket lines. without acknowledging the protest. "I assume I'm expected," she said. "Always," I replied, and let her in. She entered the office with the grace of someone who knew exactly where she wanted to sit and precisely how much attention she deserved. She didn't speak until she'd arranged herself in the visitor's chair with the posture of a diplomat and the silence of someone trying not to betray how fast her heart was beating. Wolfe closed his book and set it aside. No one said a word for a full 5 seconds. Then he said, "You were clever." Yvette's mouth tightened. "Not clever enough." "True. You constructed a facade well enough to satisfy clients, preserve investments, protect reputations. But you underestimated 2 things." She didn't ask what they were. She waited. "First," Wolfe continued, "you underestimated the longevity of guilt. You assumed it aged poorly, that after enough time it would break down, lose potency. But guilt, Miss Rollins, ferments. It becomes sharper with time, not duller." Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to him. "And the second, you underestimated Claudia Lisa. You thought she was malleable, vulnerable, still suspended in the same uncertainty you helped her create. But she's moved on from that shadow. And now it clings to you." She sat back just slightly. "I didn't kill Greaves." "No," Wolfe said. "But you played with proximity. You encouraged silence. You corrected narratives. You positioned yourself as the person who could interpret the scandal, and that made you responsible for its shape." "I protected the others," she said. "You protected yourself," Wolfe corrected. "They were incidental. Greaves was inconvenient. Claudia was disposable. That is not protection. That is control." A small exhale escaped her, not a sigh. Just the release of something she hadn't realized she was holding in. "Am I to be arrested?" "No," Wolfe said. "Not today. But the case has reopened. The statements have been submitted. The documents provided by Mr. Barron have been authenticated. You will be questioned, possibly charged with obstruction, fraud, coercion. What happens after that depends not on what you did 10 years ago, but on what you choose to do now." "And what is that supposed to mean?" Wolfe leaned forward a 1/4 inch. "You know where the bodies are buried, Miss Rollins. I mean that, figuratively, though I would not be surprised otherwise. You will be asked to tell your version of events. This time you will not be the one deciding which version is printed." Her shoulders dropped the smallest fraction. "You enjoy this, don't you?" "No," he said. "I prefer justice with clarity, not drama." She rose, adjusted her scarf, and paused at the threshold. "For what it's worth," she said, "I didn't want her silenced. I wanted her still." "She never was," Wolfe said, "and now neither are you." After she left, I sat back and whistled low. That was the sound of a kingdom falling. "She ruled nothing," Wolfe said. "She merely arranged, like a florist in a funeral home." I tilted my chair. "So this is it?" "Yes." "Finished?" "No," he said, "but concluded." He opened his book again and resumed reading. I didn't ask which chapter he was on. It wouldn't have mattered. In Wolfe's world, every story eventually returned to quiet. Justice might not be swift or satisfying or perfectly apportioned, but when it arrived, it settled in like the final course of a good meal, small, balanced, and irrefutable. That evening, Claudia sent a note. It wasn't dramatic or emotional or even handwritten, just a simple thank you. She didn't ask for a follow-up. She didn't suggest a dinner. She didn't say goodbye. And that, Wolfe remarked with faint approval, was the most honest ending we could hope for. Fritz served roast duck with black cherries that night. Wolfe approved. I didn't say much. I'd had enough duck for one case. But I will admit, there was something satisfying about the bite, something final. The week following Yvette's visit to the brownstone passed without scandal, spectacle, or subpoenas on the front page, just quiet movement beneath the surface, the Kind Wolfe noticed the way most men notice bad weather coming. Claudia's testimony had gone to the DA's office. Felix Troy's lawyers were sending out early feelers for immunity. Carmela was fielding offers from 3 publications for an insider retrospective, and Adrian Barron was suddenly unavailable for board meetings, press engagements, and polite society. As for Yvette Rollins, she hadn't been arrested, not formally, but she'd been asked to remain available, and her firm had quietly replaced her name on the letterhead with the kind of efficiency only real money can buy. Wolfe, of course, didn't gloat, not with words. But the third time he reached for his beer that Friday evening without sighing, first I knew he was content, or as close to it as he ever got in this line of work. I was across from him in the office, the last of my notes on the case open in my lap, pencil balanced behind my ear. We hadn't spoken in half an hour. Finally I asked, "You think they'll charge Yvette?" "She will never see prison bars," Wolfe said. "She will, however, lose what mattered most to her. Control. Yes. And reputation. Without those she is disarmed. Adrian, too." Wolfe made a face. "He will recover. Scoundrels with polish often do, but the taint will follow him. A few clients will whisper. Some deals will wither, that is enough." "And Claudia?" He didn't answer immediately. He glanced toward the window, dark now save the glow from the street lamp, then back to me. "She will decide who she wants to become, now that she no longer fears being defined by what she once allowed." "You think she'll talk to the press?" "No," he said. "She has already said the most important thing. To herself." I leaned back, letting the quiet settle. "It's funny," I said. "We started with a dinner invitation and a woman saying she was afraid someone might die. Nobody did. And yet it still felt like murder." "It was," Wolfe said. "Murder by silence, by manipulation, by the slow poison of untruth allowed to stand. No gun, no poison. Just suggestion." He looked at me. "Mr. Goodwin, the most effective murder is often the one that leaves no corpse, only damage." I let that one sit for a minute. "Still," I said, "I prefer the kind with bullets. At least you know where to duck." A grunt. Wolfe reached for his beer. "And what about us?" I asked. "No bill, no report to draft? You may invoice Miss Lease at your discretion. As for a report, there will be none. I do not record defeats of character." I smirked. "Then you'll forgive me if I make a few notes of my own, strictly for posterity." "Phooey," he said, and opened his book, and that was that. No victory parade, no courtroom climax. Just truth, laid out piece by piece until even those who tried to bury it had no choice but to step aside. Dinner that night was veal. Fritz had outdone himself. Wolfe approved. I didn't complain either, and when I closed the front door at 10, sharp, I stood there for a second, listening. No echoes, no unfinished business, just peace.